Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Okay, is everybody ready? Ready to set off? Okay. It's not too dry and tedious, this course? Okay, so now we come to the Four Noble Truths. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is the first afternoon session of Sunday, September 2nd. Okay, and now we come to the Four Noble Truths. And as probably everybody knows, the Four Noble Truths play a very central role in the teachings of the Buddha. When the Buddha explains or describes his own attainment of supreme enlightenment, he explains it as the realization of the Four Noble Truths. We see this in many suttas, for example, in the... Let's just get some... Yeah, in the Buddha's first discourse, at the end of the discourse, he says that as long as his knowledge and vision of the Four Noble Truths as they really are, in their 3 phases and 12 aspects, was not thoroughly purified, I did not claim to have awakened to the supreme, unsurpassed enlightenment in this world. But when my knowledge and vision of these Four Noble Truths was as they really are, in their 3 phases and 12 aspects, was thoroughly purified, then I claim to have reached the supreme perfect enlightenment in this world. And then when the Buddha gave his first discourse, he actually made the Four Noble Truths the subject of the discourse. And then and again in the suttas, when we read that somebody makes the breakthrough to the Dharma, what they know, what they see, are the Four Noble Truths. And so the Four Noble Truths then become, or knowledge or direct understanding of the Four Noble Truths becomes the defining mark of a noble person, one who has reached at least the first stage of enlightenment, the stage of stream entry. And then through the repeated cultivation of the Four Noble Truths, the cultivation of that realization, then one eliminates all the defilements and gains full liberation. And so initially, to reach the first stage, one has to break through to the realization of the truths. And then based upon that insight into the Four Noble Truths, one continues cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path with emphasis on deepening one's understanding, deepening one's realization. And then as the realization deepens, then one breaks through to the second stage, third stage, and final stage. So from this we could see the central position that the Four Noble Truths have in the Buddha's teaching. And then there's a saying, it's attributed to the Venerable Sariputta, that whatever good dhammas there are, whatever good teachings there are, all of them can be included in some way within the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so now we're going to look first at the way the path of purification, the Visuddhimagga, treats the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths are the noble truth of dukkha, which is usually translated somewhat as an approximation as suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, the noble truth of the way, the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Okay, first let's take the derivation of the words for the Four Noble Truths. So we don't need any more. So we have the word dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, and padipada, or magga. I typed by mistake M-A-G-A. Okay, so this is in a way another example of what I would call playful word derivation. So first, the first part of the word dukkha is actually dur, which has it's used in various ways with a meaning of bad or hard. And so it's said that, okay, so the first part is dur, so we have an expression like duputa is a bad child. Dudasa is something that's hard to see, hard to understand. And then the Visuddhimagga takes the second part, ka, as having the meaning of empty, not in the sense of sunyata, but as being hollow or insubstantial. And so it says that the first truth is dukkha because of vileness or badness and emptiness. Okay, then the word for the origin of suffering is samudaya, which comes actually from, literally, it suggests the sense of rising up, the uprising, the arising of suffering. And then the text says the second truth is the reason for the arising of suffering when combined with the remaining conditions. And then the third noble truth is nirodha, cessation. And now the first part of this word ni denotes absence. And the word rodha is sometimes used in the sense of obstruction. Here he says a prison, maybe constraint is better. And so the third noble truth is void of all destinies of rebirth, and so there is no, you could say, no obstruction of suffering. And then the fourth noble truth is the way, or perhaps we could even say the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. So it's the way to attain cessation of suffering. And then we refer to these four truths, we speak of them as noble truths. So they're always called the Arya Satya, the noble truths. So why are they called noble truths? And so here the Visuddhimagga is actually quoting from a number of suttas which give explanations why they are called noble truths. And there's actually different reasons given which show the relationship between the word noble and truth from different angles. Okay, so one reason given is because the noble ones, the Buddhas and so forth, when it says and so forth, it means not only the Buddhas, but the Pacceka Buddhas, those are the solitary individual awakened ones, and the Arahats, and all of the other Aryan persons penetrate them. Okay, so because the noble ones penetrate them, these are called the Four Noble Truths. Okay, then another explanation given is that they are the truths of the Noble One. And then it said this is again quoting the sutta, in this world with its various deities and so forth, the Tathagata, that is the Buddha, is the Noble One. So that is why they are called noble truths. So they are called noble truths. So that is why they are called noble truths, because they're the noble truths that have been discovered by the Buddha and proclaimed by the Buddha. So the Buddha is the supreme noble one. So those truths of the noble one, of the Buddha, are the Four Noble Truths. Then another explanation is given. They are called noble truths because of the nobleness implied by their discovery or by their realization. And so here it said, is owing to the correct discovery of these Four Noble Truths that the Tathagata is called accomplished and fully enlightened. Okay, so anyone who discovers these Four Noble Truths becomes a noble one. And then this I find to be the most interesting and maybe the most convincing reason for calling them noble truths. So the noble truths are the truths that are noble. And it said that to be noble means to be, we have to say, to be real, to be true, to be not deceptive. And so then there's a sutta which says that these Four Noble Truths are real, not unreal, not otherwise. And the Pali for this is that there, tattva. Yeah, the word, well, tatani, avitatani, ananyatani. So the ani ending, this is just indicating that it's the four truths are grammatically neuter plurals. But the key word here is tatta. Tatta, it's related to an adverb, tatta, which means such or thus. And so the Four Noble Truths are thus or such. In a sense, you could say of the Four Noble Truths, that's the way it is. If any of you remember back in the 1960s, Walter Cronkite's daily news program, at the end of every program he says, and that's the way it is. Maybe Tuesday, September 3rd, such and such a year, 1960, 69, let's say. So that's the way it is. So you say the Four Noble Truths are, that's the way it is. And then avitatani is just a double negation of that. So vitatani is something which is not the way it is. And avitatani is not the way it is. So maybe you could say that's the way it really is, just to put it more positively. And then unanyatani means not other than the way it is, not other than the truth, not other than, share genuine, undistorted, unfiltered truth. Okay, then there's a way of bringing out the more detailed implications of each of the Four Noble Truths. This is a passage that occurs here in the Visuddhimagga, in which it's quoting from an earlier commentarial type work called the Patisambhidamagga, which brings out for each of the Four Noble Truths, it brings out 4 nuances of that truth. 4 sort of underlying meanings or deeper meanings. I put this into a Word document so it's easy to see. Okay, so first for the noble truth of suffering, the truth of dukkha. Okay, so one of these meanings is pilana. Pilana means oppression. And so the fundamental idea here of the way the fact of dukkha is often explained, that is being oppressed by all of the different types of dukkha that are enumerated. Birth, old age, sickness, death, and so on. So all of those are felt as a kind of oppression. Or even pilana, we could even say it's a kind of hurting. Okay, another nuance is sankata. Sankata means conditioned, what is put together by causes and conditions, what arises through the functioning of different conditions. And here we come to a very, very broad implication of the Four Noble Truths, or of the first noble truth. The implication is that whatever is conditioned, whatever arises through causes and conditions, is in some way dukkha. So usually, this shows up the drawback or the inadequacy when we translate dukkha as suffering. When we translate dukkha as suffering, then we think, in order to count as dukkha, it has to be something that's painful, something that's explicitly experienced as suffering. But the deeper meaning of this first noble truth is that anything that's produced through conditions is unstable and unreliable, because the conditions that support it are bound to change. And so if we put our hopes on what is conditioned, when the underlying conditions that are supporting it collapse, then the object, the person, the thing that we're building all of our hopes on, that support of our hopes is going to collapse. And when our hope collapses, then we feel miserable. And so in that sense, you could say, when you look at anything conditioned, that I take delight in, that I enjoy, that I rejoice in, because it's conditioned, if I cling to it with great hopes and expectations, I'm bound to meet disappointment. Okay, then the third meaning of the truth of dukkha is santapa, which is burning. And probably this applies to the most intense forms of dukkha, which are real suffering, that one feels as burning. Even it can be sometimes things that seem relatively trivial. Like for a few days, I had this kind of rash on my legs, and it itches so much that some nights I almost couldn't sleep because it's itching, itching, itching. So I could describe it as a burning sensation. So I can't say that I'm in a real state of terrible suffering. I'm not crying, I'm not running for my mommy, help, help, help. But the itching is becomes so terrible that one even thinks, oh, maybe I should just, I don't know. And one tries all sorts of creams and lotions. They work for 15 minutes, then they wear out. Okay, so that's burning. And then, of course, there are much more severe types of suffering that are burning than an itch on the legs. Okay, and then the fourth aspect of dukkha is viparinama. So that is changing, but actually, though we translate viparinama as change, but this V in front gives it a somewhat negative turn. It's not simply change in the way the seasons change from spring to summer to fall to winter, but it's kind of deterioration. It's an undesirable type of change. We see maybe most distinctly when we change from youth to middle age to old age, heading towards death. Okay, so those are four sort of implications, or four nuances of the first noble truth. Then we come to the second noble truth. Okay, so this is samudaya, which is literally the uprising of suffering, usually translated the origin or origination of dukkha, of suffering. And so one meaning here is ayuhana, which is translated by Jnanamoli as accumulating. I think the sense here is that first, what is identified with the origin of suffering, sort of explicitly, is craving. And so the idea here seems to be that craving is something that accumulates, that we go on sort of endeavoring to fulfill our desires. And in this way, we accumulate and build up more and more craving. And then that craving functions as the cause of dukkha, of suffering. Then another nuance of the origin is nidana. And nidana, we could say, is some of the meanings: source, basis, cause. So that's maybe the most explicit of the four. This is the one which most explicitly identifies craving as the cause of dukkha, the cause of suffering. Then the third and the fourth seem to be quite closely related. One is sangyoga, and that is, here it's translated as bondage. And so, being in the grip of craving, one is bound by craving. One is in a state of bondage. And then the fourth aspect of samudaya is said to be palibodha. This is translated as an impediment or a blockage. So it seems bondage and impediment seem fairly similar in meaning. Okay, then the third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. And this is, in the ultimate sense, identified with nibbana. And then some of the nuances of this, the implications. One is nisarana. Nisarana means, literally it means a moving out, a sort of running out. So we can translate it as escape, not in the sense of escapism, where you're running away from facing your problems, but it's just like if a house is burning, then you want to find the exit, the fire exit, so that you can escape from the fire. So nisarana is the exit from suffering. Another implication is that is viveka. Viveka means seclusion. So you could say that the cessation of suffering, it's secluded from all suffering. It's sort of separated from suffering. And then a third nuance is that it's asankata, which means that it's unconditioned. And this is referring explicitly to nibbana. So nibbana is that which doesn't depend on any causes and conditions. It's that ultimate state, which is unarisen, unproduced, unchanging, not disintegrating. So it's unconditioned. And because it's unconditioned, it's amata, which means deathless. So when one attains the cessation of suffering, or the cessation of dukkha, then one is released from birth, old age, and death, and one fully realizes and embodies the deathless. Okay, then we come to the fourth noble truth, and that is the truth of the magga, the path. And that, of course, is the Eightfold Path. Okay, so some of the nuances of this. One is niyana. The word niyana, it comes from near, which gives the sense of out, and yana, going out. So this is the way out from dukkha. So it's the outlet, I would say it's the way to the emancipating way, better than emancipation itself. The emancipating way. A second nuance is that it's hetu, it's the cause, or maybe we could say the means to liberation. And then the magga, another third implication is dasana. Dasana means seeing, so seeing the truth. Because when the path arises, then one sees the truth of the Dhamma. So a direct perception of the truth. And then the fourth nuance of magga, of path, it's called adhipateya. And adhipati is, the original sense is an overlord, like somebody who is like the owner of an estate. or the governor of a realm, of a territory. And so Adhipateya is something like governorship, literally like governorship, probably because when you've reached the Magga, a sort of, I don't know the exact meaning, maybe it governs the, maybe it predominates in leading one to liberation from suffering. I'm actually not quite sure exactly about the implication of this quality. Okay, so those are the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, 4 for each truth. And this comes from, as I said before, it comes from a work called the Patisambhida Magga, which is an early kind of analytical treatise which looks at the Dhamma with very, very fine, discriminating sets of categories for interpreting the teaching. Okay, so let's continue now looking. Here we're doing a kind of broad overview of the Four Noble Truths, taking them as a whole. Then afterwards, we'll look at the individual truths. Okay, this is interesting and important. So this is explaining the meanings. So what is the meaning of the word truth here? And it says, again, it uses that scholastic kind of terminology. First I'll read it, and then I'll try to paraphrase it into normal English. It is that which, for those who examine it with the eye of understanding, is not misleading like an illusion, not deceptive like a mirage, or not undiscoverable, unfindable like the self of the sectarians, but is rather the domain of noble knowledge as the real, unmisleading, actual state with its aspects of affliction, that's the first noble truth, production, the second noble truth, the quiet or peace, the third noble truth, and the outlet, the fourth noble truth. It is this real, unmisleading actualness that should be understood as the meaning of truth. And then he quotes that sutta that was quoted earlier, that this suffering, and this is said for each of the noble truths, this suffering is real, not unreal, not otherwise. Okay, so the point here is that these four noble truths, the key phrase is that this is the domain of noble knowledge. So this is what the noble ones know as the basis for their understanding of the human condition, and what they understand as the basis for their quest for liberation. And it's what they know when they've reached the liberated state, the enlightened state. This is the perspective from which they view the world and which they teach to others, to guide others to the state of liberation. And again, the important point about the meaning of truth, that it's something which is real in the sense, not ontologically, but as something to be faced without flinching away from it. Like, this is the truth about the nature of life. And it's not misleading, not deceptive in any way, but this is the actual way things are. Okay, then the text raises the question, why are there exactly 4 noble truths, not less, not more? And then it gives an answer, because no other exists, so it's not possible to add another noble truth here, not even necessary. So you don't have 5 noble truths or 6 noble truths, but there are exactly 4, and because none can be eliminated. If you eliminate one, then you break up the meaningful pattern established by the 4. And perhaps maybe the way to understand simply the reason why these 4 noble truths hang together the way they do as a kind of self-contained structure or pattern is because we have in the first noble truth the statement of the problem of human existence, the problem of, at the extreme, suffering, but in all of the different shades of meaning of dukkha. Some feeling of dissatisfaction, discontent, some sense that things are not quite perfectly in order. So dukkha is the problem of human existence. The second noble truth shows the cause of that problem. The third noble truth declares that a solution is possible. It's possible to rise above suffering, to gain release from suffering. And the fourth noble truth shows the way to release. Then as to the order of teaching, actually this is just what I said. Okay, the truth of suffering is given first since it is easy to understand. I wouldn't say that it's easy to understand, but I say the truth of suffering is given first because, I would say because it directly sort of confronts us with the problem that we have to deal with. So this is, in a sense, the whole problem of human existence is just summed up in that one simple word, that there is suffering in existence. And then the truth of origin is given next to show its cause. The truth of cessation is stated to make known that with the cessation of the cause, there is cessation of the result. And then the fourth truth, the truth of the path, comes last to show the means to achieve the cessation of suffering. Okay, then this section is a kind of numerical exposition of what is involved in the Four Noble Truths. So it's kind of analytical treatment of the Four Noble Truths. So in the description of the first Noble Truth, the truth of dukkha, we find 12 items, or 12 things constitute the truth of dukkha. 12 aspects of human existence that exemplify suffering. So that is birth, old age or aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Then association with the unloved, separation from the loved, not to get what one wants, and then in short, the 5 aggregates which are subject to clinging are suffering. So that's the enumeration of the first noble truth. Then comes the enumeration of the third noble truth, the enumeration of the second noble truth. So here we have 3 items. There's actually 1 item which is craving mentioned, but it's of 3 kinds. So it's the craving that produces new becoming, which is accompanied by delight and greed, delighting in this and that. That is to say, these are the 3. Craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for non-existence. Then comes the third noble truth. The third noble truth, there's only 1 item in the third noble truth, and that is Nibbana. And then the fourth noble truth is the truth of the path, and in the path there are 8 items, because it's the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so those are the 8 factors from right view through right concentration. Okay, so that gives us a kind of broad overview of some of the main aspects of the Four Noble Truths in general, the general perspective on the Four Noble Truths. Now we're going to come into the discussion of each of the Four Noble Truths individually. Okay, so we start with the truth of dukkha, the first noble truth. And under the first noble truth, the first item is birth. Okay, first he speaks about the many meanings of this word, jati in Pali. And then he comes to a formal explanation. So birth should be regarded as the aggregates that occur. Again, this is in what we might call Buddhist hybrid English. Birth should be regarded as the aggregates that occur from the time of rebirth linking up to the exit from the mother's womb in the case of womb-born beings, and as only the aggregates of rebirth linking in the case of other types of beings. Okay, so what is meant here, rebirth linking? So rebirth linking, that is the first moment of consciousness that begins a new existence. So this is the moment when the stream of consciousness that is coming over from a being or person, if it's a human being, from a being that has died, passed away. So when their stream of consciousness, the continuum of consciousness, connects to a physical organism, this would be an ovum, and it starts the life process. So that first moment of consciousness that arises to start the new existence, that is called rebirth linking, the moment of rebirth linking. And so first he says in the general way, from that moment of rebirth linking through, in the case of womb-born beings, through the whole process of development in the womb until one emerges from the womb, that is called birth. So that is, we might say, the conventional definition of birth. But then he says, in the direct sense, it is the first manifestation of any aggregates that are manifested in living beings when they are born anywhere, that is called birth. So in the sort of more precise definition of birth is that just that moment of rebirth linking. So the moment when consciousness sort of grasps hold of a newly conceived physical organism and starts the life process, the aggregates at that first moment when consciousness arises. So at that moment, consciousness connects to a physical organism, and then it turns that physical organism, the fertilized egg, it turns it into the rupa kanda, the aggregate of material form. And along with consciousness, there comes the aggregates of feeling, perception, volition, and volition. So the 5 aggregates arise simultaneously. Of course, the mental aggregates are in the most elementary condition, the most rudimentary kind of functioning. And that technically is what is called birth. And it's in other states of existence, there's no gradual development in the womb, but in the heavenly realms, the hell realms, it's said that the beings just arise spontaneously. And so in that case, the 5 aggregates just spring into being all at once. There's no slow and gradual development. Okay, so in this way, the birth is technically the first genesis. That's the first moment in any realm of existence. Okay, so why is birth called suffering? Why is it said to be suffering? And the reason is because it is the basis for many kinds of suffering. And here now the text is going to mention, or to provide different schemes for showing the different aspects of dukkha, the different kinds of dukkha. So the one which is the most commonly used for explanation, the one I say with the strongest foundation in the Pali Canon itself, is an analysis into 3 kinds of dukkha. I want to see if I can increase the size of this a little bit. Okay, so the first in Pali, it sounds like just a repetition, dukkha, dukkha. Venerable Nyanamoli translates this as intrinsic suffering. Well, we could say it's inherent suffering, or it's the dukkha of suffering. Okay, the second is viparinama dukkha. So this is the suffering of change, or the suffering of, remember, viparinama, it's not simply change, but it's deterioration or decay, kind of undesirable change. And then the third is called sankhara dukkha, which he translates suffering due to formations, which it's a rather difficult phrase to understand, but we'll see what it means as we go along. Okay, so now he's going to explain what is meant by these 3 types of dukkha. Okay, so the first, intrinsic suffering, or dukkha dukkha, is bodily and mental painful feeling. So this is the type of dukkha that is actually suffering, the felt and experienced suffering, whether it's bodily pain, all of the different types of bodily pain, or the different types of mental pain, like sorrow, grief, misery, dejection, gloominess, maybe anxiety, depression, worry, and so forth. All of those different manifold forms of mental suffering. And the bodily suffering, stabbing, throbbing, piercing, disturbing, burning, itching, piercing. What are some of others? Use your imagination. So all of that is summed up in dukkha dukkha. And so because these are inherently painful. Okay, now it's said that bodily and mental pleasant feeling are called the dukkha in change, or dukkha of change, because they are a cause for the arising of dukkha, of suffering, when they change. So this is not saying simply that pleasant feelings change and fade away and then pain arises, but rather that the pleasant feeling itself, when we look into it deeply, it's a kind of subtle form of dukkha, because that feeling is bound to change. And then if we cling to that pleasant feeling, when it changes, it's going to give rise to pain. And so even while it's lasting, while you're driving around in your nice, bright, shiny car with listening to music blasting out of the radio on the car or a tape deck on the car, and you're impressing everybody on the streets, and you're living in your penthouse apartment, and you have like splendid parties every weekend, and you have a good paying job and you're wearing beautiful clothes. Still, when you look into all of that pleasure that you're enjoying, there's a subtle kind of dukkha underlying that, kind of maybe even very deeply buried clinging to that pleasure, and a kind of fear or apprehension that it's going to change. And then so it's already dukkha while you're enjoying the pleasure. And then when it changes, then it gives rise to actual painful feeling. Then it turns into dukkha dukkha, intrinsic suffering. Okay, and then the text says that equanimous feeling, that's the neutral feeling, and the remaining formations or conditioned things of the three planes are called suffering due to formations, because they are oppressed by rise and fall. So to put this into somewhat simpler language, all conditioned things are dukkha because they're constantly arising and passing away. So this is somewhat different from the suffering and change. Suffering and change means that I'm enjoying my happiness, my good luck, my good fortune, for days on end. And yet that happiness and good fortune is dukkha, because at some point it's going to change. Even if I preserve it up to the time of death, when death comes, then I lose it all. So that is a kind of suffering. But the suffering due to formations, due to conditioned things, this is the unsatisfactory nature of conditioned existence, because everything that makes up our being, these five aggregates, is always arising and passing away, arising and passing away. And so when one gains deep insight through the practice, the intensive practice of insight meditation, then one sees that what one takes to be I, to be me, to be myself, is just a aggregation, a constellation of the five aggregates. And each of these aggregates is just a process of arising and passing away. at incredible speed. Just as soon as you see it, it's gone. And so this is what we're holding to, is the basis of our identity. But it's always changing moment by moment, falling away, breaking up and falling away. Okay, there are some other ways of analysis. We don't have to go into that. Into those. Okay, maybe before we go into the suffering of birth and so on, it's almost 10 after 3. It's almost time for the break. So let's take a break. Yeah, I have 3:09, and the break time is 3:10. Okay, so we could take the break now, and then we come back 3:30, and then we'll continue with the first Noble Truth.